just like to welcome everyone to a lecture and presentation by Susan Scher. Susan Scher is actually a Syracuse native, studied ceramics at Alfred State, and has worked as a binder, as a conservator, and book artist, performance artist. Really wide palette, really fascinating work. And so, without further ado, Susan Scher from Anchorage, Alaska.
Thank you, Peter.
I'll be here.
Oh, yes, I'm going to try this technology, and Peter's here to assist me if I get into trouble. Thank you all for coming. I'm really excited to be here in Syracuse and to speak with you at Syracuse University. I'm visiting my family at the moment and had an interesting experience yesterday at the home I grew up in. I found an art piece that I made 30 years ago at Alfred when I was an undergraduate student. And it was fascinating to me because it had so many elements of the bookishness that fascinates me today. There were hinges and layers and things behind things. It was a found object piece, but there were probably 20 or 30 different kinds of hinges on it. So it was just one of those things that an aha moment, kind of a personal way of seeing or something that still interests me today. So, like Peter said, I'm living in Anchorage, Alaska now. We've lived there for 10 years. And before that, I was in New York City for 20 years, working in book conservation and taught a lot of classes, all different levels for children, adults, artists in the book area. And I still do much of that today. So the first slides I'll be showing are some of the environment that I live in now, or that I live near to now, and that's Alaska. And we'll see how this goes. Let's see. There we go. This is a photograph on the road to Denali, which is Mount McKinley, the highest peak in North America. And what fascinates and just is the most marvelous thing to me about Alaska is its big open spaces and the vista and the largesse of almost everything. Things are big. The sky is big. The mountains are big. Fish are big. And it's beautiful. So that largeness figures into my view, as well as the minute detail of things. So if you go to Denali Park, you're looking at the mountain, but you're also looking at these incredible little details of wildflowers and lichen and rocks and colors. And my work is very much connected to the large and the small and the detail, and I'll be showing you that in just a little bit. We're very connected to the water up in Alaska. We're surrounded by the sea, by inlets, by Cook Inlet and bays, Ketchimek Bay in Homer. And this is across Ketchimek Bay from Homer, Alaska. The tide fluctuation in Alaska is huge. I think it's the second largest in the world, next to the Great Barrier Reef. So this pool, this bay that we're looking at in the slide, the water is receding, but at some points in minus tides, the water completely disappears. And what is revealed are the mussels and shells and starfish and all kinds of sea creatures. And it's very exciting to tide pool when these tides go out. And these are just some of the close-ups of the beaches and the shoreline. Some kelp, seaweed, colors, textures. The fishing industry is quite present in our lives, and this is the side of a fishing boat. The bumpers that hit the docks. And I guess I see books in many things, so that's what I was looking at here. This is December 21st, probably about 10 years ago. And the sun is setting at about 3:30 in the afternoon. And the sky turns the most amazing colors, purples and blues and pinks. And the trees in this shot are covered with something called hoar frost, H-O-A-R. It's when the moisture in the air freezes and it coats everything with a sugar coating, like confectioner's sugar. And it's like being in a wonderland. It's pretty remarkable. And here are some chain link fences covered with hoarfrost. And that's another chain link fence. This was a series of days where the hoarfrost would build and build on itself and started filling in those chain links. And the next few slides will be some recent work. This is a piece I'm currently making to go with a poem by a man named Richard Lewis, and it's called The Sleep of Waters, and it's a performance we're developing for children. So inside the box are various kinds of creatures that have to do with the sea. So it's a suitcase-like box, and when you open several layers of it, there are various compartments, and inside the compartments are these creatures that come out and work along with his words. And I brought a couple of the pieces from that box here today, and I'll show them to you at the end. This is an exhibit that I had at the Anchorage Museum of History and Art, a solo exhibition in 2006. And it was a 2,000 square foot space. And initially, trying to think of how I would fill that big a space with books was daunting. But I worked for about 1.5 years to create most of the new work for this show and incorporated some other pieces as well. So I'll take you through this show a little bit. This is a piece called Headbanded Strips, and it's been in a couple of shows that Peter has curated for the Guild of Bookworkers. And when I made 21 of these strips, they're about 30-inch strips, and then worked on the surfaces with stenciling, collage, sewing, drawing with colored pencil, and adding photographs and other kinds of details. And then each strip has a headband sewn across the entire 30 inches. And in the museum, it was displayed on a spiral staircase-like form, so you could see the fronts and backs, and the light came through some of my translucent and transparent elements. This piece is called Fire and Flame, and when it's folded, it's a long strip. An accordion folds closed. And open, it looks like this, somewhat what I think of as a cardboard quilt. The cardboard sections are attached the way in which we would attach covers to make a leather binding. So if you were sewing your book on cords and then you wanted to attach your covers, you would weave them in and out of the cover and then splay the ends of the cords. So, yes?
I'm sorry,
That's okay.
when you're done talking, could you go back to the previous slide?
Okay.
It's not too hard.
The right?
We'll figure it
Oh,
out.
we will, okay. Oh, that's the next one. No, oh, okay, so, let's see. All right, Peter. Oh, okay, so I have to do this, yeah.
Yeah, click on the left.
Oh. Oh, wrong one. Yeah. We'll try one more time. Let's see. All right, I'll do your assistance. Sorry. Okay, that, yes. So you can see the connections. They're all cord attachments. And I think of this, I like to think of the book as a physical object that relates to the body. And in this shot, my idea was taking your books to market. We see so many people in various cultures who carry food or whatever their wares are on their head. And often, my pieces are quite heavy, and the easiest way to carry them around is on my head. And recently, when I was in New York, I had to carry several boxes to and from various places, and very hard to carry down here, so I just ended up carrying them on my head and walking through the streets of New York. So, next slide. So and then here's a detail of how the cord attachment works between the pieces. So there's short pieces of cord and they splay out onto the boards. It's about 164 panels. Next slide. This piece, there are two pieces here that I titled Tally Sticks, thinking about marking time by making lines. Some of the early tally sticks were shells or wooden sticks that had markings on them. And these are plastic pipes, 10-foot plastic pipes that I've cut with initially with a saw and then segmented, colored with crayon, and reattached. The inside of these pipes, they were white cylindrical pipes. Just by chance, when I opened that pipe up, it was a discovery. The inside was black, because you really don't see that when you see the closed pipe. And they related very much to what baleen looks like. The baleen whale has a long filter feeder, if anyone has ever seen it, and it has a very almost plasticky black look to it, and ribbed as well. So, next slide. Oh, back one. Yeah, that's very touchy. Okay, this piece is called Zip-Off Fence. I worked on a series of panels with 20-point map folder stock, layers and layers glued together, and as my ribbing, I used welding rods. So the piece is about 4 or more feet high, 48 inches actually, with all these layers of papers, cut-throughs, punches, and a lot of detail. Crayon, twist ties, handmade twist ties. We could go to the next slide. And this shows a detail. Each panel is connected by a 36-inch long zipper. So they come apart. Now, the zippers, I didn't sew the zippers in. They are laminated between the two layers of the board. And then I worked with, on the edging and sewing to finish the work in much the way that a tailor would do finished work on a garment. So I remember my aunt, when I was young, had some suits from the stores downtown, like Sadie Ann, or I don't know, some of these old clothing stores, and they would have little diamonds on the pockets, hand-sewn diamonds. So that's what I was thinking about in my detailing, was some of these fine tailoring details. My grandfather was also a tailor. Next slide. And these are just a few of the surfaces. There are 26 panels, painted, collage, drawn, front and back, so 52 different sides. Yes?
What is the relationship between each panel? I mean, is it random, or is each panel built on a story, and it's, a narrative? Or?
It's not a narrative, it's not sequential in that way. It's more of an experiment with the different ways I was layering things, the different kinds of markings I was making, and one panel leading to another as far as, oh, maybe I could try this next time. Then there are words scattered throughout, most of them having to do with how fences affect us, that they divide us, that they are a way of denoting space, a way of measuring. And I don't know if you noticed, this is one of my favorite little found items. The tape there only goes to 3. And I've had it for a long time. I'm really attracted to these quirky little items. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Next slide, please. These are some other pieces in the show. I've been working with masks for a long time, some out of paper, some out of vellum. Most of my masks have some type of book element. This one, on the piece on the left, has an accordion chin. So if you pull the string, the chin goes up, and when you release it, the chin goes down. And the piece on the right is called remnants. Of course, when I work with so many materials, I'm always making parts for things. I don't always use every part in everything, so I have lots of little experiments, and they landed on one piece. Next slide. I also, last year, worked on a series of brushes and brooms. It seems, when I was in New York, my studio was separate from where I lived. I would travel on the bus from one part of Brooklyn to the next to get to my studio. So I had that separation between my living and my work. Now, in Anchorage, I work where I live. So I found that there were many domestic issues coming into my work, and one was this series of brushes. Every time I go to wash a brush, I have to do the dishes first. So the series of small brushes is called She Washed Her Brushes in a Sink Full of Dishes. And you could go to the next slide. And that's a detail of one of the pieces. I did a very small series. There are 3 of these brushes that have the same text, yet the object is, they're each different. Each one is unique. And they're made from hog gut, which is wrapped around an actual brush, and paper and sewing. Pretty simple. I began using hog gut as a result of living in Alaska, because it's a material that, not hog gut, but walrus gut and seal gut are used in a lot of native artifacts, a lot of I think boat building and containers and so on. And many artists in Alaska are using hog gut because we have access to that. The seal and walrus are specifically only to be used by Native Alaskans. So it's kind of a funny material to work with. I'd never worked with it before. It's kind of a milky, opaque, wet, slimy material when you start, and when it dries, it turns transparent. It's like parchment. It's pretty interesting. And it will take on a shape. You can use it much in the way you would use paper mache. Next slide. This piece is called 50 foot something of 1-inch books, 50-foot strand of 1-inch books. And it's probably about 500 1-inch books that are hand cut into this particular razor wire shape. And some of the text is found text, and other are different papers depending on their color. The book that I used most was called Growing Up in South Africa Under Apartheid, and it talked about the different ethnic groups and how there was a hierarchy among the different groups, so that East Indians had one set of restrictions, and Jewish people had another, and black people had another. And it was about children and how children were treated different in that society. And on the right is just all coiled up, and then when I display it, I like to have it resemble that idea of razor wire. Next, please. This piece is called Foundation. It's made out of a lig-free board. Many of the materials that I use and approaches come from my experience in book conservation and bookbinding. And I really like this lig-free type 1 board. And I paint on it, I cut it up, I shape it, and then I reconnect it. The base of this piece is welded steel with actual wheels, and then it's batik painting, and it's wired together so that it holds its shape. And the little ice cream cone shapes on the top are text from letters that my father has written me since I moved to Alaska. When I moved to Alaska, he thought, he's never going to see me again, and how will he ever stay connected? So he wrote me every day for a number of years, newsy things, you know, what he was doing or what they ate for dinner and that kind of thing. So I have a huge collection and archive of letters from my father. So that's the nature of this piece. And it's also a movement piece. It can be a dance partner. It has handles. It swings around, much like a dress mannequin. Next slide. I've worked on a series of skirts, again with this idea of the slats connected by wire, relating to some of the Far Eastern books, the bamboo slat books and Chinese wooden books. So wired panels, collage, painted, and then the skirt on this piece is very kinetic. It moves with the air. It has weights on the bottom, so if you just brush by it, all the pieces start moving gently.
Is that woven on as well?
No, wooden doll.
Oh, okay.
Another slat piece. This one's called, my titles, Coiled Serpent. It's shaped cardboard panels that have been reinforced with bamboo skewers and coiled and painted, and it moves. I kind of followed the flow of the shape of each panel. It shifted. When I made a triangle, one particular shape, it would move the next panel over. So I kept playing with where it was going to move depending on the shape of each one of those individual units. So this is the piece coiled up, and then the next slide is what it looks like uncoiled. So it's about 5.5 or 6 feet when it's all spread out like that. And they're painted both sides. I'm really interested in the idea of viewing things from more than one side, usually both sides, even when those sides are hidden. And I think that's the bookish nature that appeals to me. Even though you're not seeing the opposite side of this, it's painted a pale salmon-y orange, and it reflects, that color reflects on the wall, and you see it even though you're not seeing it. And I'm very focused on how that detail works, even if your viewer sees part of it or they don't ever see it. So if you turn some of my pieces over, you'll see another finished side that isn't often displayed. Next. Oh, back. Yeah. This piece is another one that came out of working at home. My husband likes to read stock reports, so he'll print them off on the computer, and they end up in piles all over the house. And of course, that gets a little bit frustrating for me, so I started to collect them and sewed them all together. So this is about 9 months of stock reports. They're 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, and when I was in New York, I had many different jobs. One of them was worked for a bookbinder on the Upper East Side named Sidney Pearl and his wife Irma. They ran this little bookbindery, and a few of us worked with him, and he did a lot of binding of magazines. So he would chop off the spines, and then he would oversew the different sections together to be a year's worth of whatever magazine that was. So I learned this binding from him. And at a certain point, I'd have a couple inches of 8.5 by 11 paper. I'd take PVA and just put it on the spine, and that held it like a pad. And then I would take a butter knife and slice through, taking off about a 1/4 inch section or less. And then I would start stitching. And what you would do is stitch into the previous section, and then you keep going and going. And because these were so massive, I drilled every single hole to connect to the previous one. So the whole thing is about 3.5 feet of paper and a wooden base. And it's called The Bowl Collapses Under Its Own Weight. Next. This was the first piece I made when I went to Alaska. I was nervous that I would never find any art materials. How would I work? Where would I get paper? Where would I get cardboard? So there was a store that sold boxes and cardboard, and we bought a roll of corrugated cardboard, corrugated one side, And I went to the hardware store and bought pipe insulation. There was a lot of that. And made this piano hinge binding. So it was quite difficult technically to feed a soft pipe through a piano hinge. I don't know how many of you know how to do that, but you'll have an opening from one piece of paper on this side and an opening from another piece on this side, and then you insert something, a pencil, a stick, insulation pipe, between those to connect them, much in the way a piano hinge connects the piano top. And it's all wired and with electric lights and spoons and a double set of headbands. So here I'm playing on those details of the book, which are so enjoyable to me, the sewing of the headbands, the different ways of connecting, making attachments, and also working large. I, again, enjoy the physicality of the book, how we relate to it with our bodies. When we move a book, we're manipulating it. And it's that idea of manipulation that has been my focus for many years now. How we connect physically, how our bodies relate to the books.
What's the size of the image on the right?
It's the same piece, so it's about 6 feet. Mm-hmm. Okay, next slide. That's a detail. This piece is called Bee the Queen Bee, and the clamshell box that surrounds the inner box has chambers where the bees live, and they're made out of felt. And the letters are printed just on an inkjet printer. One of the techniques I use, I'll take a very thin paper like a repair tissue. I'll tape it to a regular sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper, and then I'm able to print on very fine paper just in my printer. So I do a lot of that, and carefully, and then I'll use those, manipulate those, and glue those onto wire structures. So that's how the bees are made. And the next slide. Inside is this Jacob's Ladder box that has several covers. So there's 2 Jacob's Ladder boxes. Most of you probably know that structure where if you open it from one direction, it opens, and then you can open it completely from the other. And that's how every panel on this piece works. So there are mostly images of women in different configurations, a lot of things from my collections, some of them images that came from libraries I worked in as a book conservator, where I was able to make a copy of some things and use them in my work. Next slide. So this shows a little bit more detail about the Jacob's Ladder. The parts of it appear and disappear. The chambered box reveals and hides different components when you manipulate the box. Next slide. This is another piece that I made soon after I got to Alaska. It's called Carrots Anyone, and it's a performance piece based on the idea of the cigarette girl, where you come out and you walk around the room and you say, cigarettes, tipperillas, right? But instead, this piece has to do with body image and nutrition. So the box straps on to the back, and the panel folds out, and then the legs come out, and there's a dance that goes with this. And then inside the box are many more chambers and books, pop-up breasts, and accordion arms. So as I move my arms, there's an accordion attached to them. So if I go here, here, then that whole thing moves like a book. Next slide. And these are just some more details. Inside the box is another box, and inside that box is a carrot box. And each little book, it's a miniature book about 1 by 2 inches, is sewn to a styrofoam mini carrot. And the text and images all have to do with food. Some of the text reads, think thin, eat nutritious and delicious, and other kinds of food advertising words. Next slide. This is a piece called Izzy. It's a felted doll made with handmade paper, a styrofoam buoy, and needle felted. and it has hinges that are aluminum screw posts. So every part of this moves. Next slide. So that doll is one in a series of dolls. Again, it seems to me when I make things, whether or not they're officially called books, the idea of the book feeds my work in these areas too. So these dolls are all hinged, book-like in some way. The piece on the left is 2 as 1. It has a male side and a female side. And then the piece on the right is called Celery Woman. So her legs are made out of styrofoam celery. Next, please. These are some vellum masks. I have vellum in my collection from various kinds of bookbinding projects, and just have been experimenting with it a bit. I don't know if any of you have ever worked with vellum, but if you wet it, it becomes very limp and malleable, like a washcloth. And then when it dries, it stiffens and it takes on a shape. So I would use a mold and form the wet vellum around it into these mask shapes. The piece on the left has a whole roll of the dots that they use on envelopes to run your tie around. And the piece on the right has various book elements and a drop chin, a little photograph, and a little pencil closure. So these are wearable masks. They can be used in performance. They have a piece that attaches your head into the mask. Next. I've worked on a series of pieces that have a cast element. This piece is called Health, Beauty, Honor. And it has text from Shakespeare plays, and along with various collage images. There's a cast element that's an epoxy resin where I've embedded things in, and my goal in this is to create cords that I can sew a book around. So I'll cast this element, and then I'll add cords or ribbons or something into that wet cast part, and will extend out, and then I'll be able to sew onto the cord that comes from that chunk of hard epoxy. Next. This whole series of pieces is done in that way, where I'll cast a piece, embed something, whether it's a cord or a shoelace or a ribbon, and then be able to add an attachment to that which comes from the original piece. This piece was cast into a punching trough from bookbinding, a wedge-shaped wooden trough that we use for punching holes to make books. Next. Another in the series, this is called Turnip Shrine, a cast element with cords embedded, and then accordion butterfly book attached to that, and the text has to do with the turnip as a vegetable and how people view turnips, that it was a vegetable of the lower class. And yes, this is, so it's elevating the turnip to a higher level. Next slide. This piece is called Traverse. It's a steel anchor that they use to keep the railroad ties tied down. And I was able to felt over it. You can use wool fibers to felt over just about any object. So I wrap the felt around the steel and then use the process for felting, which is adding heat, water, soap, and agitation. And so felting part of that, and then latching on this fan book at the top, which is handmade paper and felt and collage. Next slide. Same series here. This is a group of sea creatures, cast parts with felted tentacles. Next slide. And this is a detail. I used little tort dishes to cast the main part of this piece, and then worked on the tentacles after the cast piece was hardened. Next. One opportunity that's been really fantastic for me in Alaska are public commissions. And we can take a look at some of those. In 2004, I received a commission to create ceramic tiles for a new high school that was being built. Anchorage and Alaska as a state has a really good 1% for the art program. So whenever a new building is being built, whether it's in the city of Anchorage or in the state of Alaska, there's a 1% program, and they ask artists or ask you to submit a proposal to produce art for these particular projects. This was a large new high school. There were 8 or 9 artists who participated, and people had seen my ceramic books, so they thought I can do ceramics. And they asked me if I would create murals for the 2 sets of boys' and girls' restrooms in the high school. So that's what we're looking at here. And I used some commercial tile, the grids on the floor, and the borders around the top edge. And then I created 48 square feet of handmade tile they were handmade murals, tile murals, little segments. So that's what we're going to look at here. Next slide. So some details of the floor grids. Next, we can go through these pretty quickly. I had a lot of fun with this. I put tiles everywhere in inconspicuous places, high and low. So everywhere you looked, in every stall and above the urinals, were tiles, handmade, with text, some with image. And this one says, "You grow up the day you have your first real laugh at yourself," by Ethel Barrymore. And I did quite a lot of research on my quotes, you know, trying to put myself in the place of some young people and what might speak to them in some way. So we can keep going there. Life is like playing a violin and learning the instrument as one, playing a violin in public and learning the instrument as one goes along. Next. I picked 2 themes when I was working on the tiles. This one went into the boys' bathroom, and it was my spinning saw blade theme, bicycle parts, and some other kind of archetypal shapes and things. Next. And then for the girls' restrooms, I was working more with this kind of serpentine spiral shape. Next. So we can just flip these pretty quickly. That's the saw blade. Next. Another quote by Helen Keller: "Seldom do I think of my limitations, and they have never made me sad. Perhaps there is a touch of yearning at times, like a breeze among flowers." Some of these also went into a stairwell. So I had four restrooms that were filled with tiles, and then a stairwell that led from one floor to the next. And this is another quote, but layers and layers of quotes over one another so that none of them were really readable. But if you look at it in the right raking light, you can read the top quote, which is by Louisa May Alcott. Next. And then these are some of the ceramic books. Coptic bindings with clay covers. Pretty much a journal. There are some images, like an end paper type image in some of them, and others are just blank pages. And that's a detail of the spines when I line them all up. And I think one of the other appeals of the book form to me is the repetition and how things look stacked together, stacks of books, stacks of spines, stacks of stitching, and the color variation. Next. Another part of my project in the high school was to create a 16-foot-long accordion book that fit into a circulation desk in the library of the high school. And it's called Information Ages, and it traces some of the moments in time in the history of communication between people and the development of paper and books and cuneiform writing and Mayan counting. So I'll show the next few slides are some details of that book. So there's some Coptic bindings, there was cave painting, petroglyphs, Mayan counting, an abacus, and Egyptian hieroglyphs, and a quipu there on the lower left. Quipu is the knot tying that was used by the Incas and some African cultures as a way of accounting, and some believe storytelling. Next. That's a detail of the petroglyph page. Next. Wax books and the cuneiform writing, the spread of paper, Chinese binding, Far Eastern binding, bone oracles, all these different ways that people used to communicate before the invention of paper and then the invention of paper. And some more details. And the cuneiform writing is punched and carved out of a very heavy handmade paper. And that's the Chinese slat books. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Chinese wooden slat books. They were strips of wood that were latched together with cord, beginning on the right, and then they would be a continuous kind of book where slats would get added as time went on, from right to left, and the writing went vertically. Next. This is a commission I'm working on at the moment. It's a piece that's going to be in a new hospital in Anchorage for a cancer center. The Providence Hospital is building an entire new building with up-to-date technology cancer center, and they asked me to submit a proposal for a donor recognition area. And my proposal was accepted. And this is a 30 by, like 15 by 30 foot space. It had just a straight wall. So my proposal included a curved wall with a variegated painting, a 6-foot diameter sun-shaped tile mural, some floating pieces, an 8-foot metal sculpture, 6 pieces of furniture, a definition of the floor with some kind of carpet variation. And the main part where the donor names would take place would be on these wooden slats that are much like a lattice wall. So there's a detail shot. So that's its scale. The floral pieces that are floating would also have names on them. And next, this is the next stage after my model was to come up with a more detailed final proposal, what materials exactly I would be using, what the glazes would look like, how the names would look on the slatted strips. And there's a wonderful woodworker in Anchorage who does this laser technology and can print those names, burn them into the wood. So there'll be over 300 names in this space. Next. And then these are some of my older pieces. Before I moved to Anchorage, I was working a lot more with performance, and these are some of my performance pieces. Early on, I started making these fold-out screens where they're a closed square or rectangle, and then they fold accordion out and then fold up. And the original idea for this came when I was working at the Metropolitan Museum, and we were doing a lot of map repairs. And the way that the maps were folded into books, they would fold down and then accordion in. And then there was usually some attachment into the text. And wherever that map attached into the text, it was always torn. So a lot of our repairs were on these fold-out maps in the books. So I pretty much copied that notion of the piece folding in and down and then in, and was able to work really large with it eventually. So next slide. Here's another screen. It's about 6 feet high. It's folds down. You can see the unit. It's a rectangle. So this piece folds down and then accordions in. I received a grant in the late 80s to work with a dancer, a musician, and a theater artist, director, and we created a piece called Unfolded World. And it used 20 or more of my props, and we created the piece around the props. And we met once a week for a year to put this piece together. We'd rehearse in different spaces, try out all these props. There were percussion instruments and costumes and sets and everything that moved around and changed. So the performance was really about the transformation of the objects and our transformation as we manipulated them. Next slide. So here's a percussion band. I made these instruments out of cardboard, and there were a couple that really had a nice sound. And this is just our little rock band. We had hats and garters and belts, and everything shook. And next slide. These are also from the Unfolded World performance. The piece on the left is a pocketbook. It looks just like a pocketbook, and then when it opens up, you can put it over your head and wear it like a costume. And the two other pieces they fit on your hands, so you can actually work with the boxes in movement, and then covers come off and they throw out all these different things as they open. Next. This piece I made in 1985. It's a 13-inch cube. It's called Unfoldings, and I'll just show them in a fairly quick sequence. It opens up, and it keeps opening and unrolling. More things appear, and then in the end, we'll spend another second on that, the last one if we could. So when the entire 13-inch cube is open, I've opened not only the main part of the box, which is like a giant game board, but each panel then has another something that opens out and can be set up. For example, there's a tower there based on a triangle, bound like a book or a box. And when it's flat, and then as I pull it and manipulate it, it'll stack and stand on its own. Next slide. This was a performance I did in the late 90s. It's called Box for a Brighter Side. It's a suitcase-like box. It weighs about 70 pounds. And it opens out with some screens and pop-ups. Next. And keeps opening and opening. There's a very large screen in it, and costumes. So that's the screen. I worked on those two pieces separately. I made one side and the other side, and a lot of times when I work, I don't know where I'm going to end up. So I'll make something and then I'll leave a hinge. The way that these are made is I'll have a big sheet of cloth, or I'll work with my hinges and laminate something to both sides of it. So in the end, I leave hinges so that if I want to connect something, I can still do that. And if not, I just cut the final hinge off. So these are collage, of hundreds of photographs and paintings, and also cut-throughs where you see the red highlights. Those are all areas that light passes through. They're meshes. Next slide. And these costumes are in the box. The first one anyways, the one in the foreground is inside the box in a pocket, and it pulls out. It's flat and it's a pop-up, and then it becomes the costume. And both of those masks are in their own mask boxes in another box. Next slide. And this is the last two slides. One is a performance piece. It's like a puppet. It has lots of different ways it can be viewed. I think of it just purely as a movement piece. It can be worn as a headdress. It can be manipulated in an animal-like way. And that one was from the mid-90s. And then the piece on the right is one that I made in Anchorage. It's a single folio with a halibut weight at the bottom, and it hangs in space, and it's painted both sides. So that's the end of the slide images, and then I have a 5-minute video of a performance with this piece, which is a paper slinky. So it'll show how we use this piece in the performance. This is just a folded sheet of paper, roll, several segments attached together. So we'll take a look at that, and then following that, I'll be happy to answer any questions, and I also have a few props I can show you. All right, there it is. This was done in Anchorage with the Anchorage Symphony Orchestra. A friend of mine is a composer and a dancer from the university. A little more on. Thank you. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
We play with the slinking.
Sure, you can play with the slinking. Yeah. In the early days in the Center for Book Arts, I'll just say one thing and then happy to answer your question. Katie Kyle, who lectured here not too long ago, showed us how to make this bowl, and she was demonstrating how to make a little wallet book. And I worked with another friend, Julie Bennett, who was with me at Alfred in the sculpture department, and she folded 100 feet of it, and then we started printing it as a movement object. So that's where that came from. And it's like a waterfall or air, and really operated just by letting it do its thing. Gravity, I don't do much to manipulate it, it's just gravity. Did you have a question?
Yeah, what's a comment and a question of this? I find your work to be very colorful, very interactive. I kind of want to consider as a sculptor,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's great because I'm a dancer, so I try to incorporate my art with my performance art. But I was wondering, have you ever had the opportunity to create a playground for the kids?
No.
I think that would be, very colorful, very interactive, and your work would definitely
That sounds great to me. I have, thought about public parks, but never had an opportunity to create something like that. There would be a lot of things to think about as far as liability and restrictions and moving parts. Sometimes when I do a performance, when I was just in New York a couple of weeks ago, we did a performance for children, and I worked with the suitcase piece and the masks and the pop-up spikes. And one thing I do in that situation is invite, once the performance is over, the piece ends with everything open out on the floor. And I have kids or anyone from the audience come up and invite them to walk through the piece more, very carefully. I'll take away some of the more vulnerable pieces. But it's really fun to watch kids play in those structures because they're hiding. That's the first thing they'll do is hide in some of the little boxes that get created. So that is an area of interest to me. It's just haven't had that kind of opportunity. Yes?
Well, you're obviously a dancer.
I have a visual arts background, but
Really?
yes.
Because the combination of the books and the performance seems so unique to me. It's so adorable. And
Thank you.
and the way you move just seems to me as if you're a dancer.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that you say that. I grew up in a very athletic family. My dad was on his way to be a professional baseball player. I have 4 brothers. We were always, fighting and playing and roughhousing. So I feel like physicality is really important to me. My interest mainly has been in the visual arts, but when I started working in a way, thinking about books and their transition and how things move, and I made some of those initial pieces early on. The cube piece was one early piece, but there were others that preceded that had to really be manipulated to be seen. Once I started thinking about that and how important that element was in my work, that I really had to show someone how to use this. If I had it on display, someone might think, well, that's a nice surface or that's an interesting structure, but the real subject was the transformation. So I also believe that it's very hard to show books and show their details and have it really connect with the audience. So manipulating it for someone was an option that I liked. And once I started doing that, I thought, well, I'm going to have to learn something about this. So during my time in New York, I took clown classes and yoga classes and contact improvisation, and other types of dance classes. And it wasn't comfortable for me particularly. I was usually the only non-dancer in the class, and it was intimidating, but you know, I learned a lot. I learned a lot from the performers, the more professional performers that I worked with. The ones in the slides, Nancy Smith, you know, the director, fabulous stage presence, and the musician was a great performer, and the dancers who helped me choreograph some of the pieces. And I learned things about my pieces that I didn't know. It took a lot of giving over, because I would make something and it would be fresh and crisp, and the folds were all great, and you know, the cover wasn't scuffed. And then I'd bring it to rehearsal, and they would be throwing it around and opening it, and oh, they closed it the wrong way, and it got a mark on it, and I had to, you know, come to peace with that aspect, that my pieces were going to be used, and used in a way that was fairly rough, and I would have to do repairs on them, that kind of thing. But I'm probably getting off track.
Where did you get to perform?
Oh, many different places, and throughout the country, and some foreign countries as well. And a lot of times in conjunction with book exhibits, where the gallery or museum wants an event to go along with the opening, or some kind of subject-related program. So I've been in formal theaters and hallways, and everything from fancy lighting to fluorescent lights, and schools. Yes. All right. Maybe we could have the more house light up kind of feeling. Is there the front light? Can I just put that one on? Oh, okay. Okay. So I'll just show a couple of these things. Each one of these is in the box. The first piece I showed, which was the C piece, and this is just a scroll, very simple roll. And just got to get it going a little bit. It goes like that. So these are stenciled and crayon, I believe, on this. Yep, stencil and crayon. On remade, which is a paper that we use to interleave for support when you're washing books. It's a non-woven fabric. And then a laminated layer of board to section off the different parts of this. I'm thinking about making a large one of these that would be a set when we start the performance. If I had a big scroll that rolled out, and then I could hang it up, then that would set the stage for the rest of the C piece. So. Then I have two fish. This is the first fish. This is actually an old fish. And one of the things I like to do is add a place to insert your hand. Just a little loop out of a sewing tape, or linen sewing tape. And I chisel it in, and then I can stick my finger in, so I'm able to pick these things up in a very simple way that audience doesn't often notice. So, this guy. The eyes are going in two different directions. And then, I don't know why, this is just one of my things. I love this thing of that it changes. So the skirt comes off. And then the fish, and then I have another loop down here, and then the fish can swim.
Or shimmy.
Or shimmy. So, the salmon side and the trout side. And it's a tracing of my arm. It's an arm fish. So it just really is that. And this is similar. I have my loops here. This is a recent one. I just did this in the last couple of months. And it's an accordion bookfish.
They have nice sounds too.
That's interesting that you mentioned that. I love the different sounds that paper and different kinds of cardboard make, and they all make different sounds. So again, here's this painting both sides. So I have one which is really the front side, and then I did put roofs on this side too. Sometimes they get a little smashed down, and that's the other side. And then there's a little book element here, the habitat book. Oh, and there is one here too, so I can do this go from this side as well. But it's really that. But halibut are really a lot like this. I don't know if you know about the flounders and halibuts. They have both their eyes on the one side. So I feel like this one has its eye on one side and the other side is the underside, the flat side. But it's a fish book. So these all fit in that box, the C box, in those different compartments, each one of these things. And there's probably, I don't know, 15 or 20 different objects in the box. And just one other little piece. A lot of my pop-ups have this. Again, very, very simple, just a little linen tape hand piece. So even those boxes that I was talking about, that those are hand pieces, they fit on your hands and you can move with them. It's a couple of loops like this where you can get your hand situated around it, and then you can open it. So these are the waves, the lapping waves near the piece. Very soft. It's fun. I mean, it really is. I mean, all of a sudden your books become, I don't know if any of you talk with your hands, but I do. They become your tool for expression. So that's everything I've got, I believe.
It's interesting how we, traditionally a book is what's inside of it that launches us onto another world, and you've taken that really to quite a physicality. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It is fun.
You're awesome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. I went to, Syracuse Mountain.
Right around the corner.